Live from Sin City, it's the Socks and Pinstripes Podcast. And now, here's the star of the show, Giant Dr. Griffin!
Gambling debts. This is Diet Dr. Griffin back with another episode of the Socks and Pinstripes Podcast. Please like, rate, subscribe, tell all your friends, yada yada yada. You know the drill by now. So an interesting little story broke about our little friend Shohei Ohtani. His interpreter apparently stole $4.5 million from him and used it to gamble illegally in the state of California. The reporting on this is a bit murky, but Ippei Mizuhara, and forgive me if I mispronounce the name, has been Shohei Ohtani's personal interpreter since his time in Japan with the Nippon Ham Fighters back in 2013. They've been together ever since. MLB is probably going to conduct an investigation on this, but boy oh boy, I wonder if they're going to have the stones to actually punish Ohtani, because some of the reporting out there is that Ohtani himself actually paid off the gambling debts, and that is an illegal action. One thing that MLB was quick to say was that there was no gambling on baseball involved with this. At least they did one thing right. Now, I'm looking at the NFL, for example, and their gambling policy is very complex because you can be at a certain location and gamble okay, but if you gamble at like a place of work or something, if you like place a bet when at the practice facility, even if it's unrelated to football, you're still considered violating the gambling policy. I would just say don't gamble if you play professional sports. I don't know if we'll ever really know the truth on this. I get the feeling this could be like one of those shadow suspensions like Michael Jordan in the mid-90s when he just magically retired for 2 years, even though, Jordan was widely known as a gambler. Anyway, I doubt this will be the last time I'll be talking about this in the weeks and months to come. Speaking of Ohtani in positive news, he got his first hit as a member of the Los Angeles Dodgers during their 2-game series with the San Diego Padres. The series was a split between the two teams, and it was a joy to watch, even though I was half asleep when the games were going on. I'm out here on the West Coast, and the games were playing at 3 in the morning, so needless to say, I was in bed. We did have one of the first appearances of the Holy Glove, where Jake Cronenworth tried to field a play, and the ball went straight through the webbing of his glove. This honor was generally reserved for Vladimir Guerrero, who this happened to twice. It'll be another week before we have any actual games, but it was good to get these two out of the way. And now, on to some of the free agency news. Hey, Blake Snell finally signed a contract. Woohoo! Go Blake! You want to take a wild guess who signed Blake Snell? Those San Francisco Giants. They signed him to a 2-year, $62 million contract with an opt-out clause after the first year. Boy, those Giants just seem to want to bail out Scott Boras at every turn, don't they? I mean, they signed Jun-Ho Lee, they signed Chapman, and now they signed Snell. I mean, they tried to take Correa off of his hands last year before they saw the medical records, too. They nearly signed JD Martinez, except for the fact that JD, quite frankly, didn't want to play in San Francisco. Speaking of JD Martinez, only like about an hour before I was starting to record today, did he sign a contract with the New York Mets for 1 year, $12 million. Let me circle back to Snell first here. Snell is one of those players who probably had his career year, and to expect him to duplicate that is just unreasonable. He's going to have a down season compared to last year, and he's already starting off late, so that can't help things. However, they only signed him for 2 years, and really that's not a gigantic risk. It's just a lot of money going down the tube because I don't think this really helps the Giants all that much. Snell is so erratic, he can either be the best pitcher in baseball or one of the absolute worst. I mean, in the middle of May last year, he had an ERA near 5 and had a 1-5 record before he went on that massive bender. And they're giving the Padres a draft pick, but when you already have given a draft pick for Matt Chapman, you might as well just give one up for Blake and go for it. I still don't think the Giants are any better than 4th best in the division, especially since after I made my original set of projections, the Padres went out and got Dylan Cease, who is probably a better pitcher at this point. Yeah, I said that. Now, back to JD Martinez. This is a solid signing for the Mets to get a solid DH cleanup guy to put into that lineup for $12 million. That's a good price. He hit 30 home runs last year for the Dodgers, and the only reason he lost his job with them was because they signed Ohtani, and Ohtani filled up that DH spot. The Rangers went out and signed Michael Lorenzen, who was an all-star last year with the Phillies and Tigers. I'm not sure how much this helps them out, but they did need another starter to bolster that group. The Reds went out and traded for Santiago Espinal, a second baseman with the Toronto Blue Jays, as they got more bad news about Matt McLain, who has a shoulder issue and he's getting a second opinion on it. It's quite possible that he may require surgery. They also lost outfielder TJ Friedl to a broken wrist, and he may miss half of the season. Not looking too good for my NL Central winning Cincinnati Reds. And given that this is the last episode I'm going to record before the official start of the regular season, I figured now is as good a time as any to make my World Series and playoff predictions. In the National League, I firmly believe that the NL East playoff representatives are going to be the Atlanta Braves and the Philadelphia Phillies. In the NL Central, I'm going to say that the only team that makes it is the Cincinnati Reds, but I do think it'll be a close fight between most of the teams in that division outside of the Brew Crew. In the West, I'm going to pick the Dodgers, the Diamondbacks, and you know what? I'm going to pick the Padres to sneak in as the final wild card seed. But honestly, I think it's going to be close between most of the NL Central and the NL West. I mean, I don't even think the Giants are all that far back from the Padres, but I do think the Padres are going to have some better luck this year. In the American League, I believe that the only team that makes the playoffs out of the AL Central is going to be the Cleveland Guardians, because somebody's got to win that division and somebody's going to get a playoff spot. In the AL West, I believe that the Houston Astros and the Seattle Mariners will make the playoffs. And in the AL East, I believe that the Toronto Blue Jays, Baltimore Orioles, and Tampa Bay Rays will make the playoffs. The Yankees, unfortunately, will miss the playoffs, even though I thought that they would flat out win the division. I'm sorry, I can't go against my initial predictions after I've already made them. Now, there are reports that the Yankees are talking to Jordan Montgomery, who is still available. And, of course, Montgomery used to play for the Yankees prior to being traded a couple years ago for Harrison Bader. If they do make that move for Jordan Montgomery, I do think they have a chance at eking out the Rays. I'm not a big fan of the Rays this year, but they just managed to win 90 games every year, regardless of what players they have on that roster. They have some magical elixir that just brings out the best in everybody, even though it's like a random hodgepodge of players they have outside of guys like Randy Arozarena. So, who do I think is going to make the World Series? I'm going to take the Atlanta Braves in the National League. I think they have a phenomenal squad. I don't trust the Dodgers pitching staff, nor do I trust Dave Roberts in October to manage his pitching staff correctly. I think the Braves just have a nasty rotation from front to back. I mean, their fifth starter isn't great, but when you have Chris Sale as basically your fourth starter, and I think he's going to have a major bounce-back season, I just think they're going to be a hard team to out in the playoffs. I know the Phillies have done it the past couple years, but what happens if they don't end up actually playing the Phillies? Maybe they get one of the NL Central or NL West teams after winning 100 games. Do they make it to the NLCS at that point? Yeah, probably. In the American League, I'm going to go on a limb and say the Seattle Mariners will represent the American League in the World Series. And this is just baseball being baseball. I mean, nobody on this planet honestly can say to themselves that they had the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Texas Rangers in the World Series last year. Most people didn't have either of those teams even making the playoffs, let alone actually making it to the World Series. So just on the fact that baseball can be baseball sometimes, I'm going to take the Mariners. I love that rotation of theirs, and I've been having some concerns about the Astros rotation lately, especially with Verlander and being old. And now Jose Urquidy is having elbow issues. Sometimes baseball things just happen. And I will take the Atlanta Braves over the Seattle Mariners. I'm not delusional. The Braves are a much better team than the Mariners, but I do think the Mariners will make it this year. And I'm not just saying that because I got some buddies in Seattle. I just like that rotation. Anywho, that does it for today's show. Just want to say thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. If you guys are doing your fantasy drafts this weekend, because quite frankly, this is when you should be doing your fantasy drafts, giving us the final weekend before the season starts, and you got all of the injury updates so that you have the most possible information you can going in. Good luck to you guys. It's hard. We did our draft this past weekend for the Marty Cordova Invitational, and a number of guys have already gone down since the draft alone. Johan Duran is another guy who went down. He's got the dreaded oblique injury, and he's going to be on the shelf for a little while. I remember one year where we had to draft early because one of the managers was having their child the weekend of the draft, the original weekend of the draft anyway. So we ended up drafting a week early. And 2 of my top 10 draft picks ended up being injured that year. I had Luke Voigt, who ended up needing knee surgery and quite frankly was never the same after that. And then I had Zach Gallen, who was supposed to be my second starting pitcher that year. And he injured himself swinging a bat in spring training and apparently just strained his forearm that way. Swinging a bat. Not the worst injury I've ever had from a player on my roster. I had Zach Wheeler the year that he lost a fight with a zipper in his pants. Yes, that was a thing that actually happened. A guy who just got a $126 million contract lost a fight with his pants. Now, had we drafted on time that season, both of those injuries would have been known from Luke Voigt and Zach Gallen. So maybe next year we'll get to draft on time like we were supposed to. Anyway, that was the most long-winded outro speech I've ever done. See you guys next week.